In the year 1845, when Tennessee was still young in its statehood, and the Cumberland Plateau stood as a formidable barrier between civilization and the untamed wilderness, there existed a remote valley where the Holloway family made their home. Their whitewashed farmhouse stood. Remote valley where the Holloway family made their home. Their whitewashed farmhouse stood stark against the verdant hillside, its wooden boards weathered by seasons of punishing rain and merciless sun, yet maintaining an unsettling pristine quality that travelers often remarked upon with hushed voices. The family patriarch Ezekiel Holloway had established himself as a successful tobacco farmer, his fields stretching across the fertile lands like a patchwork quilt of earth browns and vibrant greens. His wife Abigail was known throughout the region for her uncommonly youthful appearance. Despite having birthed 6 children, locals would comment that her skin remained as smooth as porcelain, her auburn hair untouched by silver, her movements lithe and sprightly as a maiden's. What few outsiders knew was that the Holloway household harbored a terrible secret, one that defied natural law and Christian doctrine alike. With each child born to Abigail, a peculiar transformation would befall the family. Rather than the expected marks of age, the creased brow, the stooped posture, the weathered hands, the parents would appear younger with each birth, as though the years were running backward through their bodies like sand in a reversed hourglass. The phenomenon first became apparent after the birth of their 3rd child, when observant neighbors noted that the lines that had begun to form around Ezekiel's eyes had mysteriously vanished by the arrival of their 5th child. Both Ezekiel and Abigail appeared to be in the flush of youth, their countenances resembling those of newlyweds rather than parents of a growing brood. The valley's physician, D.R. Hammond Winther, documented his observations with trembling hand in a journal bound in cracked leather, its yellow pages filled with increasingly distressed handwriting. "I have delivered unto Mrs. Holloway her 6th child this eve," he wrote on a rain-lashed night in October of 1845, "though I attended her birthing of the firstborn when she was 27 years of age. She now appears no older than 16 summers. Mr. Holloway, once bearded and broad-shouldered as befits a man of 38 years, now resembles a youth hardly past his 20th year. I cannot reconcile these observations with medical science, nor with God's natural order. More disturbing still were the whispers about the Holloway children, who seemed to age at an accelerated rate when in proximity to their rejuvenated parents. The eldest daughter, Elizabeth, exhibited the grey hair and stooped posture of a woman thrice her age, though she had seen but 15 winters. The youngest, an infant son, developed teeth and speech with unnatural haste, while his eyes held the weighted gaze of ancient knowing. The local minister began to refuse calls to the Holloway estate, crossing himself whenever the family name was mentioned. Rumors spread like wildfire through the Tennessee countryside of unholy pacts, of forbidden knowledge gleaned from tattered tomes, of sacrifices made beneath the cold light of the moon. Our correspondence with D.R. Winther came to an abrupt end in the winter of 1846, when his housekeeper discovered the physician slumped over his desk, quill still gripped in his lifeless fingers. The final entry in his journal described a house call to the Holloway residence, where Abigail had announced her 7th pregnancy with a smile that stretched too wide across a face impossibly smooth and unmarked by the 34 years she had walked upon this earth. The physician's death was attributed to heart failure, though the local coroner noted the expression of abject terror frozen upon his features. More curious still were the strands of auburn hair clutched in his hand, identical in hue to Abigail Holloway's famous tresses, though the lady had not left her property in the fortnight preceding the doctor's demise. The winter that followed brought unprecedented suffering to the Tennessee highlands. Livestock perished in their barns, crops withered in storehouses, and children succumbed to fevers that burned through their small bodies like wildfire. Yet the Holloway farm remained untouched by misfortune. Their fields yielded abundant tobacco, despite the frost their cattle grew fat on seemingly barren pastures, and the bloom of health suffused the cheeks of the increasingly youthful parents. In the neighboring town of Miller's View, the apothecary's ledgers from this period record unusual purchases by Ezekiel Holloway: mandrake root, belladonna, powdered bone of unknown origin, and quantities of quicksilver that would prove lethal to any conventional medical treatment. The apothecary himself, one Thaddeus Merriweather, penned a letter to his cousin in Nashville describing the transformation in his customer, Mr. Holloway, who first came to my establishment as a man of mature years, now appears as though fresh from schooling. His voice carries the timbre of youth, his gait possesses the sprightliness of a bridegroom, yet his eyes contain multitudes of years, as though an ancient being peers through the countenance of adolescence. It was the birth of the seventh Holloway child that brought matters to their inevitable crescendo. Midwives refused to attend Abigail crossing themselves and muttering prayers when approached. Eventually, a traveling midwife unfamiliar with local law was secured for the delivery. The woman patients. Blackwell of South Carolina kept meticulous notes of her birthing cases in a small cloth-bound book discovered among her possessions. After her disappearance, her final entry reads, "Called to the Holloway farm for the birthing of their seventh, found the mother in good spirits, appearing no older than a girl of 14 summers. Her husband similarly youthful. The house possessed an unnatural warmth despite no fire. In the great room, the 5 elder children watched from the shadows, their faces lined with decades. They have not lived eyes clouded as those of the very ancient." The sixth child, though only 2 years old, spoke in complete sentences and calculated sums with alarming proficiency. The birth proceeded with uncommon swiftness, the child emerging as the grandfather clock in the hall chimed midnight upon the infant's first breath. I observed the most uncanny transformation, a ripple of youth washing over both parents until they appeared as children themselves, while the newborn's eyes reflected the knowledge of centuries. 3 days after the birth, the traveling midwife Patience Blackwell vanished without a trace or word of farewell. The only evidence of her passage through the valley was her abandoned midwifery bag discovered beside the crossroads where Holloway Land met the county thoroughfare. Inside, nestled among her birthing implements, lay a peculiar glass vial containing what appeared to be a single drop of frozen quicksilver, immovable despite the warmth of the spring air. Sheriff Ambrose Whitley, a broad-shouldered man with a face permanently creased by suspicion, rode out to the Holloway property that same afternoon. A veteran of the Seminole Wars, with a pronounced limp and a penchant for chewing tobacco, Whitley had served as county sheriff for 17 years and prided himself on maintaining order through a combination of intimidation and pragmatic justice. Yet the scene that greeted him at the Holloway farmhouse disturbed him more than any murderer he had ever apprehended. The children were arranged around the parlor like elderly courtiers. He later confided to Reverend Thomas Hargrove over a tumbler of whiskey. The eldest, Elizabeth, could not have seen 20 years, yet her spine curved like a question mark and liver spots mottled her hands. But the parents, dear God in heaven, they appeared as mere children playing at keeping house. Indeed, Ezekiel and Abigail Holloway had undergone a transformation so complete as to defy rational explanation. The once formidable farmer now stood no taller than a boy of 11, his voice carrying the high reedy quality of PI adolescence. Abigail, cradling their newborn with practiced ease, possessed the slight frame and unformed features of a girl barely past her first decade only. Their eyes betrayed their true nature, ancient, calculating, and filled with knowledge no child could possibly possess. "We require no assistance regarding Miss Blackwell's departure," Ezekiel had informed the sheriff, his childish voice forming the precise diction of a seasoned orator. "She received her payment and left of her own accord. Perhaps the rigors of rural life proved unsuitable for a woman of urban sensibilities." Throughout this exchange, the Holloway children remained eerily silent, their aged eyes following the sheriff's movements with predatory intensity. The infant, though barely a week old, tracked Whitley with a gaze so penetrating that the hardened lawman later admitted to feeling as though my very soul had been weighed and catalogued.